seeing how journalists have been assailed by authoritarians about their integrity with slurs about fake news and against anything any authoritarian doesn't like. In addition, access to the internet has given anyone with an opinion, even ill-founded, a platform. So what does the future hold for an industry under siege? We're going to be kicking off the panel really soon, but we'd also like to get your thoughts through a poll on the topic of today's discussion. So if you can please open up the Slido app and answer the question, is journalism dead? And they're going to be showing the results a little bit later on during the panel. Now with that, we're going to kick off and get the thoughts of our panel. So please welcome to the stage Liam Proud from Reuters News, the co-founder of Konbini, Lucie Beudet, and the Chief Information Officer at Mozilla, Katharina Borchert.
Hello everybody, thanks for coming. So, is journalism dead? I mean, in one sense, the answer is obviously no. I'm a journalist, Lucie's a journalist, you, until recently, ran a thriving newsroom. But in another sense, the media sector does face these kind of unprecedented challenges. We've all heard about fake news. The American president calls the press the enemy of the people. And kind of underlying all this, which I think we're going to talk about today, is a kind of weak and weakening financial backbone for the news. And there's a lot of uncertainty about what is the economic model for media online. So we've got two very well-placed panelists to help us about it. I mean, Katharina, let's start with you. There is a kind of pessimism, which I've heard you talk about before, about the role of independent media alongside these big internet platforms, these kind of walled gardens, people call them. I mean, what's the risk there, and how do you think about that?
I think the platforms have proven an interesting playground for distribution. They can ideally amplify your message. You can try different formats on different platforms. The problem is that you're entirely in their hands, and I think we've seen that with Facebook, especially this year, which for a long time, besides search, was the biggest driver of traffic for media organizations, and then decided to change their algorithms and prefer lunch posts and baby pictures. Which might be understandable from like a user's perspective, though I personally don't like lunch posts. But
you're missing out. They're the best.
You clearly have better lunches than I do, and that drove down the reach the traffic that came back through those platforms massively. And so my big worry is I'm all in favor of experimenting with them and learning how to use them better. And making that part of your strategy, but you cannot rely entirely on those platforms. You can't monetize your content well. You're entirely dependent on them for distribution. You don't have a very direct user relationship. So I firmly believe that the open web, where you can build your own website, where you can develop your own formats, where you are entirely in control of your brand and how your brand appears, is the only platform that will ensure survival and strong, thriving, independent media.
And I think the Facebook example is very well chosen. I saw a study the other day. It was a Reuters study for the Institute of Journalism at Oxford University that I think it was they did a sample of maybe 25 media brands in Europe. And on average, interactions on Facebook went down by about 9% after the algorithm change. And that's not something that you could have really foreseen as a news publisher beforehand. And it's a good example of how you're at the whim of these platforms a lot of the time. But I mean, Lucie, you're on the front line of this at the moment, running a kind of youngish news and culture website called Konbini, which everybody should check out. It's very good. I mean, how do you think about this this kind of trade-off where on the one hand you get very effective free distribution in a way that you just wouldn't have been possible 20, even 10 years ago. But on the other hand, you're at the mercy of someone who doesn't necessarily have your interests at heart.
Well, first, you're right, it's a huge opportunity, and we have to feel it like this. It's really something like we can play with it, If you want your contents to be seen, like, you have to embrace all the possibilities that people want to see contents, and there is really many platforms, Yeah. So I think for us it's really a huge opportunity, and I think we would not be here if they wouldn't have existed. So this part is definitely positive, and the other part is unexpectedly extremely positive as well for us, because Konbini has not really been impacted by the change of algorithm.
Yeah.
I think our contents are extremely premium, and our audience as well, because I think some bases are better than others, but our base, our fan base, is really extremely communicative, extremely reactive, and the engagement is really good. So as soon as the engagement is good, the algorithm keeps you living,
Yeah.
It's the base.
And I mean, how do you, obviously there's an array of different platforms that one can choose to be on. I mean, what's the attitude when you have discussed this internally? Do you just, you have to be everywhere? When Snapchat launched the kind of more of an offering for publishers several years ago, there was a lot of discussions about, how does this platform work? Do you just say, we will be everywhere possible?
Of course.
Yeah.
Do you want me to say, oh no, not this one, I don't like this one,
Yeah.
Of course you want to be everywhere. And and to be true, it's quite inspiring as well. When Snapchat invited us on the Discover, it changed our way, because it was a huge opportunity as well for us to express the journalism we really had in mind for young people, which was a more creative one, which was like something like more visual as well. And this opportunity, the way we worked with them, because they had a knowledge and they shared it. And this knowledge made us make the things differently and conceive them differently. And it impacted all our other platforms, even on all our own websites, is impacted by this experience. Yeah. So I think the opportunities are, of course, distribution, but they are also creative.
And which platform do you find the most effective? I mean, is there anyone? A lot of publishers, basically, Facebook is
Sorry,
you have this long tail
I can't choose.
You can't. Okay, they're all excellent. So, Katharina, when you were working at Spiegel Online, how did you think about the techniques to try and own that user relationship when actually a lot of the sort of distribution is, you're being disintermediated in a way, you're dependent on. I mean, what do you need to do as a news organization to break through the platform and grab hold of the reader?
I think there are a couple things. Once they come to you and become aware, I think they become aware of your brand and the hopefully excellent content you deliver. I think you can build increasing engagement loops. They might follow your page first and comment on Facebook or like something on Instagram or so. And once they actually come to your page, and that is one of the hardest things, you're trying to keep them and interest them in more of your content versus having them bounce back. And I think that's a constant tension, understandably, between the platforms who want to keep them on their own platform and any kind of publisher who wants a stronger relationship with them. And I think one of the things that honestly publishers have a little bit neglected in the last couple of years is building communities around their brands and building more opportunities for users to stay on their page and engage with each other, engage with journalists. I'm one of those weird people who actually read the comments on the internet. and I have really low blood pressure, so it helps drive it up in the morning. But I think it's incredibly important to not just use this as some kind of like slightly terrible thing below the fold where the mob dances.
Where strange people hang out.
Yes, where strange people hang out, but actually use that to cultivate a better conversation and better civil discourse, get journalists involved. And I think especially in these fraught times where media is accused of being the enemy of the people, it helps a lot to explain how journalism works, be more transparent about your work. The Spiegel, for example, has an amazing fact-checking department that works very closely with the journalists. Most users don't know that and don't understand the process that goes into delivering excellent news and excellent reporting. And I think it's on media now to explain how it works, to ensure more transparency, because I think one of the, we've talked about eyeballs and the attention economy for so many years, but I think the new important currency is trust.
Yeah, so it's transparency, keeping the audience as close to the journalists and as close to the newsroom as possible is part of the answer.
I think transparency is an important part of building trust, and trust is an important basis for forming this community. It doesn't automatically engage your community. I think your engagement mechanisms come after that, but I think that is really an important part.
Yeah. Folks, there is a poll which you can access through the Web Summit app. We're asking you to answer the question, is journalism dead? And we've had, I think, 72 responses so far. So do vote away, and then we'll get to the answers shortly. You can vote sick, alive, or dead completely. So do let us know what you think, and then we'll quickly discuss the results. So finding an audience is one thing, and there's making money off the audience. I mean, the big problem that everyone is aware of here is that digital advertising is it's almost the domain of two companies. Google and Facebook might account for, I think the Group M media agency says that they could account for about 84% of all digital ad spending this year, excluding China. So against that backdrop, Lucie, when you've got hold of the audience using your unique kind of tone of voice, how do you then go about making money off them? I mean, you guys rely on quite a specific type of strategy, right?
Yes, we work on several formats, to be true. Of course, we are partners with Facebook, for instance, or Snapchat, so the question is not like we're not totally alone. And by ourselves, we also work on formats like which are really shifting, to be true, from the traditional media to the digital, which is like brand storytelling stuff. And so we are doing a lot of these kind of formats, of course, a lot of native formats. We already talked about it, which are definitely the energy which is fueling community today. Yes, definitely. We work with advertisers.
And could you give us an example of the kind of relationship? I mean, what would that usually involve?
We have, for instance, collaboration. We talked about like Netflix collaborating with us on like series, and we have a few collaborations and some native formats as well. And
is this working? Are you profitable at the moment? Do you hope to be profitable anytime soon?
We do, hopefully.
Getting there. Okay. So, this is often called content marketing. That's one thing. I mean, do you have any thoughts about how widespread this idea of kind of branded content could be, Katharina? I mean, my instinct is that it works quite well maybe for culture. There's a little bit more kind of editorial tension when it comes to kind of more hard news. What do you think?
I think it's definitely harder to monetize hard news, to monetize long-form reporting, especially the kind of that needs a huge upfront investment because people are researching and digging into stories for months. So the overhead of a more news-focused investigative newsroom is probably, I don't know your numbers, but I'm assuming it is much, much bigger, and the overhead is just so much higher, which is, one of the reasons why so many large brands have, or one of the reasons why so many large brands have branched out in terms of content and include, like, health and wellness sections and travel and style and things like that, not only because it offers more touch points with an interested audience and might bring in other people, but such sections are much easier to monetize than There was a shooting in California last night. Nobody wants to see their ad next to a shooting.
But if you're reviewing watches and boating holidays or, health insurance products, it's
much easier.
There's a kind of mesh there. I mean, what about the other answer? There's a lot of these discussions these days, I get the impression, kind of gravitate towards this idea of paywalls actually were kind of out of fashion originally on the internet, and now we seem to have gone full circle, and everybody's talking about the importance of having differentiated niche quality content, and people are actually willing to pay for it. The example everyone wants to talk about at the moment is how New York Times subscriptions kind of seem to have gone through the roof after the election of Trump. I mean, how do you think about the value of subscriptions and what you need to do to make money off paywalls?
I think I'm excited about, this is one fashion recycle that I'm actually excited about. And I'm happy to see that because I think diversifying business models and revenue sources is incredibly important for media. I cannot stress that enough. And having a solid subscription base is great because those are your most loyal readers, people who are not only willing to come back regularly, but actually pay for your services. Those are the people to pamper and hold on to and cultivate. And I think it also speaks to what I said earlier. You have to take a lot of care to position your brand well and increase trust in your brand. And it doesn't only automatically come through good reporting anymore. And I think you also have to cultivate a community around your brand. And that is, because that is basically to speak in sales terms, that's the funnel that you can then use to sell subscriptions to. I know it sounds horrible, you're all part of the funnel, but I think that just underlines the importance of this again. And obviously I'm the exception to the rule as a former journalist, but I love paying for media. But I think it's also tricky because you have to find the right balance between how much free content is there to draw people in, to keep your brand attractive and visible in the constant fight for attention, and what kind of paywall payment model are you going to use then? And the other thing that worries me a bit, I love seeing the New York Times thrive and publish new numbers. But the New York Times is huge. It has an international audience. It has a machinery of amazingly talented people, not only in the newsroom, but in their engineering department, in sales. And people are not going to subscribe to 25 different news sources if they just casually read something twice a month. So I think this is something that the top 2% are going to benefit from because they're such big brands. But what does the whole middle layer do? I think that is much harder. And I think it also becomes harder because it's not, I don't think it's only about the money, but it's also, I get tired of signing up and having my payment data out at 25 different places to have access to only one thing. I think what we're missing is kind of a more universal subscription layer to the web. And there are great startups working on that, so maybe we'll see a solution to that.
But I think there's a good challenge,
that's an additional burden we see right now.
Just before we wrap up, let's just quickly look at the results of this poll. So is journalism dead? 70% of you said sick, 29% said it's alive, and just 2% said dead. So 115 people, there's 2 or 3 very pessimistic members of the audience. What do you guys think of that result? Does that seem about right? Fair, Lucie?
Apart from the fact that the percentages don't add up.
That's confusing. Anyway,
I haven't voted yet, so I won't go too fast, to be true.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for your time, everyone. Journalism seems to be sick, but not dead. So Fingers
and
crossed.
I have to admit, I think as difficult as the current political climate is, but it's energizing journalism and it's driving home the need for good reporting. So, there's a good thing there.
Nice optimistic note. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.